so we haven't got the feedback problem.
Sounds good.
As long as this works, you know, this is almost our oldest electronic technology, and about a third of the time it doesn't work. As you may have noticed in your job, these are brand new, but that doesn't guarantee anything.
What about batteries?
That's good.
Check the batteries, they make the white batteries.
Sounds alright. But I wouldn't like hold it down here either. Just somewhere, anywhere around the torso area. Is there anything that you need?
The people in the far corners of the room to come much closer, because it's simply harder emotionally to focus on an audience with such empty spaces. If you'd all come and kind of gather, then it'll be, as the Dutch say, gezellig, which means cozy. But that means that the people just coming in, if you could just move really close and down front too is be nice. Kind of stay away from the edges. You people are, if you could move in a bit, that'd be nice. That'd be very good. And then I'll have a nice compact audience, and I'll be able to react to you emotionally in a more interesting way. It'll make for a much better. That's better. That's much better. Thank you very much. That's helpful. Also, if the mic fails, as in about a third of the occasions they do, not here, but in my experience, then we'll be okay still. He says he has a backup, so that's even better.
I will allow Dr. O'Connor to introduce this speaker, but I'd like to mention that on April 2nd, Gatewood Galbraith, the last free man in America, will be speaking. Gatewood is famous in Kentucky, for those of you who are not from Kentucky, as being pro-hemp, pro-pot, and pro-gun, and pro-freedom. And I bumped into him in a library or in a mailroom, and he was happy to come.
Tonight's speaker, Chautauqua speaker, was trained as an economist at Harvard, then worked on economic history, studying the problem that all serious economic historians seem to work on, namely the Industrial Revolution in Britain, and did very distinguished work on that. Is embarked on a major project. I think when I last talked to her, it was a 3-volume effort. It has now become a 6-volume effort. And she's going to talk tonight on that topic, namely the bourgeois virtues. So I give you Professor Dierdre McCloskey.
Thank you very much. Frank and I were colleagues for a while at Iowa, a long time ago, although not that long ago, just a few years ago. I have a speech defect. I stutter, as you just noticed. So you have your choice. It's a free country. If you can't adjust to it, you can run screaming from the room. I won't mind. I'm an economist, as Frank noted by training, but I like to quote my favorite comedian, Mae West, the big blonde, as she called herself. And she said, I was Snow White, but I drifted. I was Snow White, but I drifted. So I've drifted beyond economics, but I don't think away from economics in one sense. I still think economics is a very nice field, and I urge all you people majoring in it to stay majoring. If you haven't taken a course in economics, for God's sakes, what's wrong with you? Come take a course in economics. I mean, after all, how else you can understand this horrible crisis we're in and all that sort of thing? But I do think, as I didn't when I was a kid, that economics really needs to be put in a larger context. As the sociologists say, and I think they're correct, I spent half of my career arguing against them, but now I think they're correct, that the economy is, as they say, embedded. Think of flowers in a flower bed. The flowers by themselves would be very strange without the earth around them. Why don't you borrow a pen from someone else? That's a much better plan. Let's have the pen borrowed and then we'll carry on. I don't think that economics by itself works very well. I don't think it's always wrong. I think if you're going to think about covered interest arbitrage in the foreign exchange market, then you'd better know some economics, and it had better be of a rather simple sort that deals mainly with the virtue of prudence, the virtue of know-how, the virtue of what the French call savoir-faire, what the Greeks called phronesis, practical knowledge. And if you do that, then you'll understand the foreign exchange market. At least you'll understand covered interest arbitrage, whatever that is. I don't need to go into it, in the foreign exchange market. But for a lot of what economists and other people are interested in, you need much more than economics. The great English economist John Maynard Keynes said that to be a good economist, you need to be more than an economist, and I certainly agree with that. Furthermore, the advantage of being in 4 academic departments is they don't ever know where I am. So I can be shopping in the old Marshall Fields now, alarmingly called Macy's. And they say, well, I think she's in the English department. No, maybe she's over in communication. I don't know where she is. I can't keep track of her. So that's good. Now this, let's see, it's 2009. I'm a historian, so I think 1909 makes more sense. But it's 2009, so for about 18 years, I've been thinking about this topic of this evening's lecture, called bourgeois virtue. Now let's talk about these terms for a while. Bourgeois is the French word for townsperson, townsman in particular. The bourgeoise is a townswoman. And you've heard of the bourgeoisie. The bourgeoisie there, that just means the class of townspeople. That's what it originally meant in French. And there are very comparable words from the same root in Germanic languages or other Romance languages. Burger in German, or bourgeoisie in Italian. They all come from the same root, meaning townsperson. But of course, this word bourgeois has gotten in the last couple of centuries has gotten this real strong bad connotation. And it got it originally from Marx. Actually, it got it originally from Rousseau, who distinguished between a bourgeois and a citoyen, a mere townsperson as against a really good citizen. Okay? But that same distinction 100 years later was amplified by Marx and Engels. And bourgeois came to mean everything bad about capitalism. The bourgeoisie were all those bad folks who profited from capitalism. And in ordinary talk, calling a person bourgeois is bad. "Oh, Daddy, you're so bourgeois," says the spoiled suburban girl. There's a famous blues song that I was singing at dinner, actually, by Huddy Ledbetter, called Bourgeois Town, about Washington. It goes like this. I won't sing because I can't, but it goes, "Those white folk in Washington, they sure know how. Treat a colored man just to make him bow in a bourgeois town. Yeah, it's a bourgeois town. I got the bourgeois blues. I'm going to spread the news all around. Here's where, let's see, home of the brave, land of the free. Don't want to be maltreated by no bourgeoisie. In a bourgeois town, I got the bourgeois blues. I'm going to spread the news all around." You should hear him on a 12-string guitar singing that song. All right, so it's a term of contempt, of political contempt. But all it really means is the middle class. That's what it means analytically speaking. So it means everyone in this room. Because everyone in this room is either a college graduate or is going to become a college graduate. And in our culture, being a college graduate welcomes you into the middle class. I mean, if you don't graduate from high school, it's a little hard to get into the middle class, but you can, even so, in the United States you can at least. But education is the big, as you know, is the big ticket to the bourgeoisie, to a middle class occupation. An occupation as a school teacher, that's middle class. Or as the manager of a restaurant, that's middle class. Or an owner of a small business, that's certainly middle class. Or an employee of a big corporation, indubitably middle class. So those are all members of the bourgeoisie, and you can see that the bourgeoisie has gotten very big. In the time of Marx, the bourgeoisie was rather small. Now it's rather big. So how about virtue? Well, in Marxist terms, it's just nuts to say bourgeois virtue. What do you mean bourgeois virtue? These are the extractors of surplus value. These are these bad guys who because of the faults in capitalism, every time they employ someone, extract profits. What, you think that's virtuous? Are you nuts? That's how my friends on the left would view my Marxist and socialist friends, of which I have lots. That would be their claim. In fact, I don't say it would be their claim, it is their claim. They say it to me all the time. But I also have friends on the right. I have lots of friends of all different politics. The friends on the right are also suspicious of the bourgeoisie, because the bourgeoisie is not aristocratic. My friends on the right, kind of extreme right, are very nostalgic for the days of lords and ladies. If you think of it in the South, the conservatives who look back to Southern agrarian, the wonderful way it was when the darkies were gay. This phrase has changed in meaning, I guess. When the darkies were gay. That kind of nostalgia for a older aristocracy-based way of looking at the world is one that conservatives often hold. And it's also very irritating to those people to hear that the bourgeoisie are virtuous. How can they be virtuous? They're not heroes in the aristocratic sense. They're not saints. Now notice who our heroes are nowadays. Our heroes are sports figures and so on. Those are heroes in an aristocratic sense. The slam dunk is an aristocratic gesture. It's a noble insult to the defending basketball team. So, on both sides of politics, on the left, Marxist socialist side, on the right, conservative, nostalgic side, the bourgeoisie are in bad. People don't like the bourgeoisie. Bourgeois virtue to these people is a contradiction in terms. Now this project of mine that Frank mentioned is to overturn all this. Look, as I told you, we're all bourgeois, everyone in this room is. So let's get used to it, huh? Let's stop feeling bad because we're not Shame. You ever seen? How many people have seen the movie Shame? Put your hands up. I see that a lot of young people haven't seen Shame. You need to rush down to your store and get a copy of Shame because it's the greatest new Western ever done. People are unhappy with being bourgeois, yet they are. And from kind of a psychological point of view, if you want to look at my work as therapy, I'm trying to help you all. You all are just hopelessly bourgeois. Most of you are going to end up with at least a 2-car garage, probably 3, and a nice suburban house, and a couple of kids, and a husband who's marginally faithful. And yeah, it's going to be your life, and you're going to love it. That's what most of us do in the United States. You know, I don't think a European can quite grasp the United States until she's flown over the United States at low altitude. You have to be on one of these small planes to see what the United States actually is. It's, there are lots of poor people in the United States. I don't deny that, and I want something. Let's take care of that. But there are also a hell of a lot of suburbanites who live in these houses that, by international standards, are gigantic. The poor people in the United States are rich by international and historical standards. That's absolutely clear. In terms of material goods, at least. Spiritual goods, well, I don't know, but in material terms, they're much better off than their ancestors and much better off than people in other countries. So we've got to get over feeling guilty about being rich. And I'll give you some therapy about how to get over it if you feel that way. And we've got to get over being ashamed of being middle class. I want you to stop being ashamed of being middle class if you are. Now, if you're not, then you're pre-education. When most people come to college, they come from very ordinary circumstances. Most of the people who go to college in the United States do. And their idea of success is a bourgeois occupation and a bourgeois life and a bourgeois three-car garage and bourgeois all the way. They haven't heard that it's bad yet. And then their professors and the journalists start telling them, and the filmmakers and the novelists start telling them, what's his name just died a couple of weeks ago? Who?
Updike?
Yeah, John Updike. You know, he was not the worst, but he just felt that being middle class in Pennsylvania was really nasty. And he told everyone this, and they read his novels, and they go, oh yeah, you're right. God, I feel so guilty about being bourgeois. And I want that all to stop. Of course, you know, I'm just a college professor. I'm not going to stop it, even with this big project of mine. The people who can really stop it are the artists. The artists, I don't just mean the high-flown people. I mean the country musicians. I mean the bluegrass musicians. I mean the rock musicians. I mean the movie producers. I mean the advertising people. Those are the people in our culture who do our thinking for us. Not thinking exactly, God knows that's not true. Not thinking, but envisaging. The world that's envisioned, that's the word, by Star Wars, for example, is a particular kind of aristocratic society. That's held up for admiration. And the bourgeois parts of it, Han Solo and his market-corrupted friends, are the bad side. Not the bad side of the Force. They're not even in the Force game. They don't even know about the Force. They're just in it for the dollar, or I forget what the currency is in Star Wars. Okay, so that's my kind of that's what I'm on about. That's my purpose. As I said, it's kind of odd for an economist. On top of everything else, I'm going to join the psychology department. I'm going to become a therapist. It's kind of insane, but that's what I'm trying to do. And my hope is to persuade the artists to change their take on capitalism. How many people here have seen the movie Wall Street? Put your hands up. I just need a survey. Well, again, I see lots of the young people haven't seen it, and you should. It's an excellent film. But it's really hostile to the world of finance capitalism. Now, we've just gone through a period, which will continue for another 6 months or so, in which finance capitalism is in really bad, has a bad reputation. So this is a good time to go see Wall Street. But it's wrong. That's my key point. Marx was wrong. Carlyle was wrong. Dickens was wrong. The muckrakers at the end of the 19th century, early 20th century, they were wrong. The artists and the intellectuals who since 1848, which is a very special date in world history, since 1848 have turned against the bourgeoisie and said, the bourgeoisie was once the party of freedom, now it's just a bunch of capitalist, bad, profit-making people, naughty, naughty, naughty. What are you after profits for? That's terrible. These people, I say, are mistaken. And they're my good friends. So I don't want to just sneer at them. I want to persuade them. Sweet talk, as I call it. I want to charm them into seeing that they're mistaken. All right. So the first book of this, as I say, I've been thinking about this for 18 years. And this first book came out from the University of Chicago Press in 2006. It's called The Bourgeois Virtues, Ethics for an Age of Commerce. And what this book asks is, can you be a capitalist and a good person at the same time? Or is being involved in capitalism just hopelessly corrupting? Now, many of my intellectual friends, who in an old phrase have never meta payroll, believe that's true, that it is corrupting to be part of the profit-making sector of the economy. And what this is an attempt to get serious about economic ethics. I mean, usually the way economic ethics is done is very peculiar. For example, the way ethics is taught in business schools in the United States is very peculiar indeed. Because you're taught in a business school course to be ethical. Why should you be ethical? Because it's profitable. Now wait a second. I thought this was a course in ethics. If it's a course in human relations, then I'm interested to know that being kindly to your employees will make more dough. That's something someone ought to learn if it's true, in a course on human relations, hiring and firing in a business school. But it's not true. You treat your employees well because you're an ethical person. Because you're that kind of human being. That's why you treat them well. Not because the bottom line will be improved. I suppose it's all right if the bottom line is improved, and that what's doing well by doing good, that's all right. Except it's not doing good if it's doing well. That is, to be more exact, it's not the only quality of goodness that it makes you rich. It's not, doesn't foreclose being rich. That is, goodness isn't inconsistent with being rich, but it's not the main reason to be a virtuous person. So what this is a serious ethics. I mean, it's a big long book. It's 500 pages of text. Lots of people complain about the length of the book, but I don't understand that because the Bible is long, and this is the Bible of the new dispensation for the bourgeoisie. This is one way to get out of this self-hatred of the bourgeoisie. Now, this book is available for sale outside, and I'll be glad to sign it afterwards. And I'm going to pass around a couple of copies. Although I'm a little cautious about this, because I did this in a small meeting of Presbyterians. I'm an Episcopalian, but I was talking to these Episcopalians, a church group, about, actually it was, it's worse. It was a national conference, a small conference of Presbyterians talking about ethics. And I sent out 2 copies. And at the end of my talk, I said, I'd like my copies back. And reluctantly, one came back. And it was a small group. It was much smaller than this group. And I said, I need the other copy. And there was silence. The Presbyterians stole my book. I suppose it's the Lord's will. I mean, it's the Lord's work that whoever stole it, I'm sure they used it for, I don't know what. Well, anyway, I was quite disappointed by the Presbyterians. I hope you'll exceed, as most of you are Baptists, I'll bet. I hope you'll exceed the ethical standing, at least, of the Presbyterians, and send back both books. They are for sale, and they aren't that expensive in paperback. But that's only step 1. What this book does is sort of clear the philosophical ground of my argument. Then the rest of the project is to tell a story. And the story goes like this. Volume 2 is called Bourgeois Dignity. Bourgeois Dignity. Why economics doesn't explain the modern world. Why economics doesn't explain the modern world. Now, you may already think you know why economics doesn't explain the modern world, but a lot of economists don't. They think that the Industrial Revolution, the tremendous economic growth that's happened in the last couple of centuries, is explicable from things like trade or investment, or if they're of a kind of left disposition, imperialism, exploitation of the third world, exploitation of the working class, something like that. And this book says, no, that's not so. So this next book, which will be available in about a year and a half, it says, no, that's wrong, no. What happened was a change in ideas, a change in what Alexis de Tocqueville, the great French student and observer of the United States, called habits of the mind, or more exactly, habits of the lip, how we talk about things. And what happened is that in olden days, and not very olden, people were contemptuous of the bourgeoisie. Everyone was, not just a few artists and intellectuals. And, pardon me, I have a cold. And the artists, these people who were contemptuous of the bourgeoisie controlled the bourgeoisie and said, you're not allowed to do this, you're not allowed to do that. And then in the 17th century in Holland, where it started, then in the 18th century in England, the notion of two things: the dignity of the bourgeoisie, that they're okay, they're good, they're a force for good in the world. That was the first point. And the liberty of the bourgeoisie, their freedom to do things, to make deals, to invent stuff. Both of those came to be argued for. And the most famous in our field of economics is the blessed Adam Smith. But he's just one among hundreds of figures involved in this. Now understand what I'm trying to explain here. There are two things I'm trying to explain. One is the fantastic increase in the riches of ordinary folks. In the year 1800, in the whole world, the average income per day per person, or the average, the amount that the average person consumed, was in modern dollars you could spend on the street right now, $3. Whereas, in the modern world, the average is 10 times higher worldwide. So it's $30 a day. And in countries like the United States, it's something on the order, average, over poor people and rich, $130 a day. Now, I want you to understand this. Here's a chart. We'll do one. Economists love charts. Let's go back to 50,000 BC. It's over here. And this is the time, approximately, the invention of language in Africa. By the way, we're all Africans. Everyone here is an African. Let's get that straight. Okay, now we're off to the races. $3 a day is what the average person earned all that time. $2, $1, $3, $3.20. $3 a day. Then around, let's see, about here is the invention of agriculture, the domestication of plants and animals. Cool. So what happens is, it goes up and then down. By the principle that the famous economist Malthus articulated around 1800, the principle of population is that if people make too much money, they start having children, and they get poor again. And so $3 a day continued. We arrive at 1800. Now look, there's 50,000 BC. That is a long time ago. Here is 1800. That's only how many generations? 8. generations ago? Your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents? That's not too many generations ago. Here's what happens to income. Now watch. $3 a day, multiply this height by 10. 10. You're at the ceiling. By the time you get to now, only 2 centuries afterwards. By the way, at the same time, the population of the world increases from 1 billion to 6.5. So in the face of this enormous increase in population, there's this astounding and unprecedented increase in income per head. That's not the only thing that happened. Because if that's all that happened, if all we had were more Fritos or more TV time, I wouldn't be too interested in it. But what also happened are political and you might say spiritual developments in that same period that elevated the quality of life, not in material terms, but in spiritual terms, in ethical terms, of most people in the world. We're now ashamed about Darfur, for example, what's going on there. We're ashamed. We in Kentucky and Chicago. Well, I can tell you, in 1800, no one was ashamed about anything of that character. Most people weren't ashamed about slavery in 1800. Right? They said slavery, well, you know, that's God's will. It's your cross to bear. To take up your cross. Sorry, you're a slave. I'm so sorry, but that's how it is. And very quickly, the spiritual character of the West and then also the East and the South changed. So both happened. It's not that it was just a material change, which is amazing and kind of stunning, but there was this spiritual change, which I talk a lot about in this first volume. So in the second volume, I'm trying to knock off the materialist explanations. That's what the book's about. It's an anti-materialist book. I spent half my career as a pro-materialist, trying to argue that everything was economics. I seem to be doomed to spend the last half of my career showing that materialism doesn't work, that it's not sufficient, that it's okay in the foreign exchange market, but it's not going to help you much in lots of other stuff, and in particular, it's not going to explain modern economic growth. Volumes 3 and 4 are continuations of this same story. What happened in the 17th and 18th century that made for this amazing explosion of innovation, going from $3 to $130 a day? I mean, look around you. Look, this microphone, although they often don't work, this one does, that's nice. But, you know, the man here has a camera. There's a camera back there. And these lights are incredible. They had to have candles in 1800. And the fabric on the floor and on the chairs is all new. And steel, they didn't have much steel. They used steel for swords in 1800. All this stuff was not piled up so much as invented. It's not about accumulation, as I said before. It's about invention, ideas, intellectual things. So those set of kind of 3 volumes are all about this spiritual change, so to speak, or at least this verbal change, as I call it, this rhetorical change. I'm also an English professor, that overcame the West and was unique. Because it's terribly important to understand that in 1500, Europe didn't look like a winner. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. But the Europeans, the reason he sailed the ocean blue was to get into the Indian Ocean market. That's what everyone wanted to do in the West. That's what the Portuguese did by going around Africa. That's what Columbus did under the Spanish crown by going the other way. They all wanted to get to China, but it's not just China they're trying to get to, it's the Indian Ocean market. That was the great, the great merchant area of the world. And the problem that the Europeans had is they had nothing that the Easterners wanted. European goods in 1500 were no good. They were heavy woolens, rather badly made. They were iron that the Chinese had invented. They were, they were all a bunch of stuff that the Chinese and the Indians and the Arabs already had, and the Ottomans already had. So there's this remarkable change from 1500 to, say, 1800. By 1800, the Emperor of China gets this enormous load, 600 cases of gadgets from the King of England. And he sends back to the King of England saying, thank you very much, that's a very nice gift, but we in the central kingdom are not interested in curious objects and inventions. Well, that was true. By 1800 it was true. But before 1500 it wasn't true. China became conservative and technologically non-progressive at the very time that the Europeans went slightly wacko about inventing stuff. So it's invention, it's the free societies of the West in contrast to the East, although again you got to be careful because there's an Orientalist view of the East, which is, it's all this kowtowing, and it's the centralized Chinese, and there's no freedoms in the East and the South Asia and so forth. And that's easy to exaggerate. Yet still there was a contrast. And out of the contrast came the brief European military superiority. Because along with their inventiveness in cannons and ships, the Europeans were shockingly brutal. The Dutch and the English, the French, especially the Dutch and the English, were notably ruthless in their conquests. In a way that, lots of other cultures found quite offensive. But okay, so there's this brief episode of European superiority. But what it does do, forget about the European superiority. Forget about conquest. Economic success is not about conquest. Conquering people is not how to become rich. It's one of the things I show in the second volume. You don't get rich by stealing. Look, ask yourself, would you do well by stealing from the homeless people in your town? Is that a good way to get rich? To hold them up with your 38? No, it's not a good idea. If you're going to steal from people, I advise you to steal from rich people, like Madoff did. And steal with a pen, not with a gun, you won't go to jail as long. So this idea that the richness of the West depended on exploiting the South and East is basically nonsense. I don't deny that they exploited the South and East. From the point of view of the South and East, the rise of the West was a big pain in the neck and was a nasty episode. But that someone gets killed in a convenience store robbery, that the clerk gets shot by the robber, who gets $38.43 from the cashier, from the clerk, doesn't mean that the murder isn't a gain to the thief. The $38.43 is the gain. So stealing was not how the rich got, how the West got rich. The West got rich with this extraordinary engine of invention. Not primarily investment, as Adam Smith and Marx claimed. That was wrong. It wasn't investment that made the modern world. If it was investment, the Egyptians would have made the modern world. They could invest as much as they wanted to. They just had to enslave people. The Chinese, who were able to do amazing things, the Grand Canal and the Great Wall, they could have industrialized if all it was piling brick on brick. No. It was a sudden burst of creativity. And that came from a change in the rhetorical atmosphere towards the bourgeoisie. So, to express it another way, I'm saying that there was an ideological change in the 17th and 18th century that made for the Industrial Revolution. Volume 5 is called Bourgeois Enemies. All my titles have bourgeois in them, because I want this word to come back into circulation as a good word instead of a bad word. I want to change its valence, as the chemists say. I want it to be valued positively, not negatively. Because bourgeois life, that is, has always been associated with freedom. Contrary to kind of a environmentalist pastoralism, it's in towns that we become free. It's in towns, to speak in Latin, that we become civilized. That's what the very word means. Townized is what it means, what the Latin means. So, I want to bring back this word bourgeois. I want people to say, oh yeah, that's great, you're bourgeois. Hey, let's go, bourgeoisie, rah, rah. 1, 2, 3, 4, who do we adore? Bourgeoisie, bourgeoisie. So that's volume 5. And then volume 6 is kind of vague in my mind, but it's all the economic things you heard that were bad about capitalism that are not. It's there that I treat environmentalism in a rather full way. And I treat, I don't know, things like the notion of the reserve army of the unemployed, that you have to have lots of poor people in order for people to be rich, and other errors that I regard as historically and economically implausible. So there you have the 6, and that's the story. The story is that there arose in Europe in the 14th, 15th century, in northern Italy, Barcelona, and Lisbon, a commercial mentality, which you see in the Hanseatic League of the North, that is then concentrated and politicized and ideologized in Holland, the Dutch Republic, 1568 to the 1560s. Yeah, 1568 to the present, and then the English and the Scots in the 18th century, especially the early 18th century, more or less explicitly imitate the Dutch and become themselves, in the phrase of Blackstone, the great student of English law, a polite and commercial people. A polite and commercial people. Because my claim in this first book, which you really must read, it's a wonderful book, it makes a wonderful Christmas present. Solve your Christmas shopping early. Buy 10 copies of the thing. Excellent. Your mom will just dote on it. She'll just love it. The argument is not only that virtue is necessary for capitalism to work well, and that's something that a lot of my economist colleagues said long before I did, but also the other way around, that markets and innovation create a polite and commercial people. That virtues, not just, I don't know, saving a lot or, accumulating a lot. That's not very much of a virtue. That's thrift, which is a very minor virtue. But courage and justice, hope, faith, temperance, and love and prudence, all 7 of the virtues, 7 primary virtues, are in some ways encouraged by a capitalist society. Now there's always the possibility that they'll be corrupted. We've got to watch for that. that's true of all societies. All societies can be corrupt. An aristocratic society can make people unjust and unloving and arrogant, proud. And a peasant society can make them unjust and humble. Uriah Heep sort of humble, false humility before their superiors. A bourgeois society, and here's where I'm going to conclude, a bourgeois society is nothing like the worst kind of society there is. On the contrary, it's resulted in our enrichment compared to our ancestors. And it's made us pretty good. Here I go with Garrison Keillor. And speak of capitalism as like what he calls on Prairie Home Companion, John's pretty good grocery. You know, up in Minnesota, they don't ever brag about anything. So they don't say it's the best grocery store in the world, they just say it's pretty good. And that's honest. That's Iowa, Minnesota honesty. And I'm saying that capitalism is pretty damn good. I add the word damn. Pretty damn good. And that the alternatives, a greatly expanded socialism, or going back to aristocracy, if that's what the conservatives want, would be bad ideas. How do I know they're bad ideas? Because they were tried in the 20th century. Nationalism, socialism were disasters, both of them. Nationalism is the bad political movement of the right. We still have a lot of it in the United States. It's very bad for us. And socialism is the bad political movement on the left. And if you don't like that, try National Socialism, where you combine the worst of both. Truly appalling. All right, so I'm making a liberal argument here, but it's not liberal in the way the word has been very strangely redefined in the United States. It's the way it's still used in Europe, the way it was used in the 19th century in the United States, which is a society of free people. A society that you're entering by becoming educated. If you didn't go to college, if you resisted ever reading a book, my joke is that Obama has written more books than George Bush has read. That's not actually true, but it's nice to say. If you resist ever reading a book and try not to get educated, you could succeed and you won't be educated. But if you do, you'll enter the world of liberality, of being a free person. That's what this is all about. The world of the free person. My claim is that freedom is indeed a force against ignorance and tyranny, but it's precisely that freedom that led to us being rich. Now, I want to end with a kind of piece of therapy. I want you all to kind of imagine, to go back into your own family. Let's do some roots work here. Let's go back into your own family. How many generations back do you have to go before you reach dirt? How far back do you have to go to get back to dirt poor? Well, in my own case, if you kind of average it all over all my family, it's about 4 generations, because we've been prosperous for a fair long time. Not all of us, but a lot of us. We were lace-curtain Irish and educated Norwegian Americans and English Americans. So we've been we've been in fairly good shape for quite a while. My great-great-grandfather was a circuit court judge in Indiana. Okay, that's nice. But for most Americans, if it's 4, that's a pretty... Their ancestors may be some of your ancestors. These were the dirt poor people of the Upper South. Okay, let's go back to the grapes of wrath. About the great agricultural depression in the middle of the country, starting actually in the 1920s, before the Great Depression, but extending into the Great Depression, published in 1939. Well, those people went to, some of them went to California. Shortly after the book was published, they got jobs in the armament industry in the midst of the Second World War. Most of them ended up with houses in the Bay Area or Los Angeles. I have a friend who's the daughter of that generation. She teaches economics at Berkeley. That's what happened to all of us. Everyone in this room has benefited gigantically from modern economic growth. And that modern economic growth was made possible, I mean, both physically and mentally. And that economic growth was made possible in claiming by an ideological change in ideas. In the end, as a famous economist said, the same one I quoted a few minutes ago, John Maynard Keynes, it's ideas that have force for good or evil. Not class or race or gender. Those categories, as important as they are not really what drive history. It's not true, as Marx and Engels claimed, that the history of all hitherto existing societies is the history of class struggle. That's wrong. The big fact of modern life is a change in ideas and attitudes. So here you have an economist who drifted. An economist who started out as a Marxist indeed, and then became a conventional middle-of-the-road, and then finally a Chicago School economist, but always of a materialist sort. And at the end of my life, I'm 66. I'm seeing that that's not the right story. The right story is we think and then we do. So I urge you to think. I urge you to think about your standing as bourgeois and how to make this middle-class life less vulgar than it is. It is vulgar, but so is every other kind of life, so let's get clear about that. Let's try to make it non-vulgar. Let's try to make it elevated. Let's try to cut down the number of hours of TV we watch every day. Let's try to stop obsessing about Paris Hilton. Let's start to think about the quality of life that we can make out of this fantastic enrichment that allows, here I'm speaking of everyone in the room. I don't see any descendants of the crowned heads of Europe, Africa, or Asia here. I don't see any Habsburg noses in this audience. We're all the descendants of dirt poor peasants. So we're no longer, here we are of an evening, talking about economic philosophy. So I suggest we go on talking about it. Thank you very much.